the great fortune to work for some very good Erie companies. Hammermill Paper Company, Erie Insurance, a startup organization, Presque Isle Insurance, and for the last 19 years, General Electric. On the screen, you can see a summary of my work history. For the last 5 years, I've been working for Baker Hughes, a GE company. But most importantly, germane to our conversation, is I've been working remotely since 2006. And I've been managing remote teams since 2008. And I've done that for the past 10, 12 years from Erie, Pennsylvania. So today I want to share with you the key points needed to be able to work remotely as an individual contributor and to effectively manage those remote teams. But we got to keep in mind that this is not an exact science. There's no concise formula or recipe for guaranteed success. It's more of an art, and because we're all human, these managements can be very intangible. What are we going to cover? We are going to cover and define what is truly working remote. We're going to look deeply at the challenges that an individual faces when working remotely. And we're going to look at the challenges an individual faces when they are managing remote teams. We are going to identify the solutions to those challenges for both the team leader, manager, and the individual. We're also going to look at how do we manage work when our teams are remote, dispersed around the world. What are the best ways for an individual to communicate, and what practices do they employ? What are the best ways and practices that a team leader would use and employ when communicating to the team? It's no secret that technology has changed the way we've worked over the last 30 years or so. But it's those changes to technology that have enabled and provided the ability and the desire and the capability to work and manage remotely. Technology has totally altered the way we communicate, not merely at work, in the office, in the shop, but across all of society. And how did that happen? Well, first of all, as we started seeing personal computers show up on corporate desks, there were some very simple applications. Word processing, email, the first form of digitized office communication. Because if you remember, prior to that, all communication was done verbally or in written, typed, hard copy memo format and distributed manually. I saw the transformation occur in the early 80s when I was working for Hammermill Paper Company. I managed our market analysis area at that time, and we were performing many studies on the demand of paper that would be affected by email and by the word processing applications. And we wanted to forecast that demand going into the future. The other impact was the mobility of devices and the shrinking of technology, the transportability of those devices and the smaller footprint. So we saw the increase of mobile devices, laptops, iPhones, and then that drove 24/7 access. We could reach anybody, anytime, anywhere across the world. And then we saw the combination of audio and video, telepresence, Skype, other collaboration tools, and finally, we see the plethora of YouTube videos. Before we engage in the discussion and detail the aspects of what working remote is, let's define it as a concept. And it's a simple definition. Working remote is defined as the individual not residing or co-located with their team, their direct reports, or their superiors. Any work environment poses challenges, and those challenges can be impediments to what the work is and getting that work accomplished. Let's review what those challenges are. First for the individual, and then for the manager team leader. So what are the individual's challenges? Well, the very first one that comes to pass is that missing visual contact. We are out of the location of where our teams are, where our managers are. We no longer have that visual contact. We also feel very much alone. We could feel that we're left out by being remote, or we could feel that we're not included. That non-inclusion can really prey on our psyche and affect our morale. Additionally, not being involved can lead to an apathetic feeling or an apathetic behavior. Now let me stop here for a second, or for a few seconds, and give you a personal example of feeling left out or being not involved. Early in my career of working remotely, I felt like I was underutilized. My manager was not taking full advantage of my capabilities, which was my opinion, possibly not theirs. So my solution to that was to volunteer, take on work projects and assignments that maybe nobody wanted to do, or that needed to get done and were unassigned. What happened after I started doing that? I became the go-to person within the organization. Everyone would come to me with problems and questions. I became to feel very involved. I also became the go-to person for my direct manager for problems and issues. So I will talk a little bit more about volunteering when we talk about solutions also later on. The other possibility of a challenge that faces people when they're working remote and that decreased interaction can drive a lack of clarity or an uncertainty, not sure how to respond to questions and problems encountered in the work environment or on our work. We may not be totally certain as to what we're working on. And that uncertainty definitely, and lack of clarity or missing direction, can lead to inactivity, which means we're not getting work done. Being remote removes any of those chances of spontaneous conversations, the water cooler conversations, the elevator conversations, the hallway conversations with our team members, our superiors, etc. Those are gone. If you're working on a global team, the challenge could be time zone differences. If your teams are in Asia, they are 16 to 18 hours ahead of us, potentially working in the middle of the night while you're working in the middle of the day. And the last challenge, being remote potentially could increase process overhead. Those are the challenges that face the individual. Let's look at the challenges that face the manager or the team leader. Now, a manager or a team leader can very well be remote to themselves as well. So all the challenges that we have identified for the individual can definitely face the manager. But there's a different aspect to those manager challenges being remote. The missing contact, the missing visual contact, can definitely lead to misunderstanding or misinterpretation of their work instructions or their direction. It can also lead to us, the manager, missing some very personal concerns that an employee may have or misunderstand those concerns. we miss the body language reactions to our messages, which at times, that body language can tell us more than a verbal response. The lack of clarity goes in both directions, from the individual to the leader, from the leader to the individual. If the individual is not explaining to the leader that they're not sure what they're supposed to be doing during their working hours or on their work, there is a definite lack of clarity. The manager also misses the same spontaneity and the spontaneous conversations that one would enjoy if they were co-located. And again, time zone differences apply to both. Most importantly, the manager needs to remember and take into account that working remotely may not be for all employees or individuals. And lastly, we are all human, and we all need that sense of feeling that we belong. We have to belong. That's probably the biggest challenge that working remotely poses. Now that we've identified what those problems and challenges are, confronting the individuals, the team leader, the team that's working remote, let's talk about some solutions that could eliminate those challenges. Let's look at the individual first. As an individual, you definitely need to have discipline. It is so easy to be distracted when you're working alone. For example, if you work from home, there are 1,000 situations that can distract one from the work at hand. Personally, when I work from home, I find myself performing some house chores in between meetings because I know these will only take 5 minutes and I can get them done. But it's that discipline required to get back to work and get back to the task at hand. The other solution that the individual has to perform when they're working remotely is they need to initiate interaction. That interaction needs to be done with their team manager, team members, or customers. Sitting back and waiting for someone to reach out to you is not advisable. You need to initiate that interaction. Once you initiate that interaction, you need to ask questions, especially of anything that you're totally uncertain or unclear of. And no questions are stupid questions. Additionally, when you ask questions, it's also good to ask for feedback. Ask for feedback on how you communicate and how you're doing on your work. And it's not just your direct manager that you need to ask. You can ask your team members. You need to communicate often. 2 times a day, 3 times a day, 6 times a week. There's no formula, but you have to communicate often. Earlier I spoke of a personal example of where I was volunteering. This is where you need to volunteer to perform activities that no one else wants to do, or that takes you outside of your normal job duties and scope. What this will do, this will increase your knowledge and your familiarity on the team, or of the team, excuse me. When you schedule meetings, schedule those meetings with a specific agenda. This will focus your communication, focus your meeting, and really hone your communication skills. Develop relationships. You develop relationships by increasing communication amongst your team members and amongst your superiors. This will provide you with knowledge of who you can call on for help or assistance in the future when you get into a tough situation, when you need help with an action that you need to perform or a task that you need to perform. This will also help you know your teammates better, and it will also help you to know your supervisor better. So let me give you an example, a real life example of working remotely. I was co-located with my manager, and my office was right next to his, and we never spoke. We never spoke regularly. We never had scheduled sessions to talk about different things. If we ran into each other, he would give me some direction. He would ask me questions. When I got my performance assessment for that year, I was very surprised that it was a poor performance assessment. And I totally understood that it was because he and I were not on the same page. We didn't talk. We didn't understand each other. He didn't give me any feedback except that one time a year in that performance assessment. When I transitioned to working remotely, I made a promise to myself that I would make sure, absolutely certain, that I was on the same page as my boss. Even though he was in Atlanta and I was in Erie, I spoke to him more times in 6 months than I had spoken to my prior manager in 3 years, even though his office was right next to mine. That experience and that dedicated communication back to my boss really drove the success for my first remote working engagement. Let's look at the leader who manages remote teams and what potentially some of the solutions are for that manager that is managing teams remotely. The manager needs to know those team members, each and every individual. He or she needs to totally understand those individuals. And the only way you know that team member and understand those individuals is by talking to them, by getting with them. Formal and informal conversations. This will drive you to be able to understand them. This will help you to be able to motivate them when they need motivation. It will provide you insight to their psyche, how they operate. You also need to give them feedback on a regular basis, consistent basis. Don't wait and bundle that feedback up once a year or once every 6 months. Give it when it's fresh and give it when it is needed. We're going to talk about continue and consider when giving feedback later on in the conversation. You should also ask for feedback on your management style, on your communication style. Are you communicating too much? Are you communicating not enough? Should you communicate more verbally? Should you communicate more via email, text message, whatever it is? You have to ask for feedback. You also need to develop a constant communication plan and stick to that plan. Schedule those sessions so that you can talk to your team as a group or individually. This will help you develop relationships with your team. And most importantly, when you do talk to that team, make sure that your expectations are clear. Nothing drives more problems than unclear expectations. Now, there are other challenges to working remotely, and CEOs of major corporations are very interested in the working remote concept. You can see the graph on the slide. When you total the lack of direct communication and the poor visibility into colleagues' actions, 57% of those workers, those are problems that pertain to remote workers. CEOs propose the following ideas to resolve those issues. Establish bonds of friendship and empathy. This is the leader of the team. Needs to establish that friendship and that empathy between those workers. You should look at pairing up workers on specific assignments. Provide shared purpose via regular recognition. Recognition is always key to morale and working arrangements. Empower team members. Give team members decision-making capability. And then once they do make those decisions, don't second guess them. Guide them, counsel them, but don't second guess. And lastly, the CEOs encourage over communication, which is a theme that and a solution that we've talked about in the past couple of minutes. What are some of the benefits, though, of working remotely? Because we've really talked about a lot of challenges. Working remotely really improves employee satisfaction. Statistics show that it reduces attrition, and statistics show that it also reduces unscheduled absences. Working remotely improves productivity. There are times when, yes, I am much more productive working from home than I am potentially working in the office. Working from home and working remotely eliminates potentially a 3-hour-a-day commute, which is downtime, which reduces productivity. Finally, let me share some statistics with you. Last year, 43% of all residents in the United States spent some time working remotely. And when surveyed, 85% of the millennials would very much like to work from home. So far, we've talked about the problems and the challenges facing the individual who's working remotely, or the team leader who's managing remote teams. We've also talked about potential solutions and actions that both the individual and the team leader can take to avoid those problems, which will lead to successful individual contribution from a remote worker and successfully managing remote teams. But we really haven't talked about the actual work. How do we manage the work when our teams are disparate, if they are working in remote locations? And how does that work get done? Well, there's a couple of things. We're going to look at goals and objectives. We're going to look at some collaboration tools. We're going to talk about expectations. And we're going to talk about one-on-one coaching. In any organization, regardless of whether you're working remotely or co-located, the company, the organization, needs to have set goals and objectives. Those G's and O's generally come from the top of the org and then get passed down to the departments, from departments to teams, from teams to individuals. And then early in the year, the teams spend multiple sessions to flesh out their goals and objectives, which then drive the individual's goals and their work tasks. So once those goals and objectives are set, the team leader managing those remote teams needs to be explicitly clear what the expectations are. What are the expectations of the individual? It would be highly advisable that those expectations are measurable so that you can gauge success. Those work tasks or those daily individual activities can be broken down into time elements. And once those work tasks are defined, we can use project management tools or collaboration tools within the stated Agile methodology, tools such as Rally and Jira. And what you can see there on the slide, on the screen, is a picture of my Rally work tasks that my team and I work on. That tool allows for instant collaboration between the team members and myself, knowing what we are going to be working on a daily basis, what our progress is towards that work, and what is left to be done. And it's those tools that we use when we talk in our one-on-one sessions and our coaching sessions. In the end, the actual work must get done. And we need to employ some of these tools and some of these practices to ensure that if we have remote teams, that we are managing them properly. Now, let's talk about the individual and how the individual may need to communicate. We've defined the work, and we've agreed upon the method to record what that work is. We may be using a collaboration tool so that we can view it and review it at any time. But as we said, the individual now needs to communicate. We all have bosses that we report to. And importantly, those bosses perform our annual assessment. And we have to meet the expectations of our superiors, of our supervisor. So it's imperative that we talk to the boss. We have to talk to the boss regularly. That frequent communication will eliminate misunderstandings and confusion. Reviewing our work will allow for clarity and will remove questions or misunderstandings. We have to have scheduled time to talk to our superiors. We also need ad hoc conversations. So these can be formal. If they're scheduled, they're formal. If they're ad hoc, they're potentially informal. It's okay to discuss non-work items with your boss, with your superior, with your teams. That will help drive and develop relationships. Getting to know each other will help on a daily basis for you to put out fires that you and your team will encounter. Those conversations, that knowledge, will allow your superior to know how much bandwidth you have. If they're giving you too much work, if you're taking on too much work, if project due dates or task due dates are slipping, there may need to be reprioritization of your work. So those conversations are extremely important to the success of you getting work done. Now, if you are a team leader managing remote teams, obviously then you need to talk to your teams. So the picture on the right-hand side of the slide is a representation of my team, my current team. And my teammates consist of individuals in the US, Houston, New Orleans, Asia, a couple of people in Malaysia and in India, but also I have individuals that report to me who are located in Europe. They're in the UK, they're in Italy, and they're in Germany. What are the practices that we perform as a team to make sure that we are all on the same page and work is getting done and we are communicating and we are understanding each other? Every morning we have what's called a daily Scrum call. The Scrum is an agile methodology term taken from rugby. And it's a very brief 10 to 15 minute meeting. And what we're doing in that meeting is we're asking, what did you accomplish yesterday? What are you working on today? And what are your obstacles? What do we need to focus on? Where do you need help? These are more operational, and they really don't need to be daily depending upon the type of work that you're performing. I also have staff meetings. Those staff meetings are more formal. We have a set agenda. I may bring in presenters from different parts of the company to give my team an insight as to what those other areas are doing. But they're more formal, and we can talk about anything that the team wants to talk about as well. They may submit agenda items to me. And then I have one-on-ones scheduled by the individuals at their convenient time to talk to them as often as they want. Mostly it's weekly. And it's there that we talk about anything. We talk about what they want to talk about, but it's there where I employ continue and consider philosophy. And I observe practices that each one of the team members that I feel are very good practices that they should continue. And then I also look in areas where maybe they could have improved, and I give them a consider philosophy. In this situation, in this scenario, you did this. Well, maybe you should consider doing it this way. It's also in those one-on-ones that I understand how far I can push somebody. Who can I call on when I really need something done immediately? Who will readily accept that challenge? Who will not? Who has too much work on their plate? Where do I need to reprioritize the work that they've been given? All of this is really the manager's job. Make the team better. You are there to guide, counsel, and advise. Now, when we look at that picture on the right-hand side, that is truly a global team. And I am managing people from Asia, from India, from Malaysia. You need to be aware of the cultural differences between team members. Many times we in the United States don't take into account the culture or the person's feelings or how they traditionally have been raised. So, for example, early in my career, I didn't understand this cultural differences. In India, the Indian culture is very non-confrontational. And during meetings, there was an occasion where I lost my temper and I began to argue, raise my voice, and become very confrontational and threatening. This does not conform to the Indian culture. This will not allow your team to grow and be the best team that it can be. So you need to be aware in the global sense of the term and the global nature of business today. You need to understand those cultural differences. I have learned to take an interest in the people from different cultures. I ask them questions about the culture. I ask them how things are done so that I don't make that same mistake twice. In the end, this is for us. Don't be the ugly American. Don't feel that we can push our method of doing things onto everyone. In summary, successfully working remote or managing remote teams requires some effort and some thought that you may not consider when you're co-located. So let's review the takeaways. Frequent and constant communication. It is key for both the individual contributor and the team manager. Understanding expectations is imperative. The individual needs to understand. The manager needs to be totally clear with what their expectations are. Agreed upon objectives is required. That goes along with understanding the expectations. You need to provide regular feedback as a team leader or a manager. The individual should search out and reach out for that regular feedback. And when asked, the manager should provide. And again, as we talked about earlier, the manager should ask the individuals for feedback on the way they manage, communicate, and direct. You should employ or you should consider using the continue and consider philosophy. Emphasize the positive work that your team has done or actions they've taken. Or suggest alternatives where you feel they need to improve. Get to know your team. Make sure you understand your team. That'll help you motivate them. That will help you know how you can challenge them. Develop relationships with them. And importantly, if you're working remotely, ensure that you have a comfortable workspace that has reliable communications. It's frustrating to get on a conference call or a phone call or a Skype call, and the audio is inaudible. That is extremely frustrating. So ensure that you have reliable communications that is efficient and works well. That is the end of the presentation, and with that, we will now take any questions that you may have submitted.
Mark, thank you so much. This was great. I'll tell you what, I totally enjoyed it, and um, want to be able to answer some people's questions. I think we had some great questions from the
Thank you,
attendees.
Kathy.
And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you so that you can go ahead and answer some of the questions that came through the chat. I'm going to turn off my video and my mute.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. So yeah, we did have some good questions, and what I'll do is I'll read the question and then attempt to answer the question. The first question was from Kathy, is what did I mean, or can I explain process overhead? Process overhead in a remote setting, I was referring to the housekeeping items of an organization, the HR issues, the financial, the pay summary issues, the performance and assessment issues. Many times what we've done is we've created workflows and forms that need to be filled out, and one form leads to another form that leads to another form. This just increases the process overhead, possibly due to being remote, and it gets to be wearing on people at times because all they feel is they're filling out workflows and completing forms. So that's what I meant by process overhead. The second question was from Alicia, insights to addressing cultural and language differences, and how do you handle them during multicultural team meetings. I'll answer the hard part first, and then I think the easier part second. The language barrier is difficult, but I will say that the rest of the world speaks English much better than we speak other countries' languages. You know, I have members on my team from India, and they speak the King's English because of the British influence in India, and I have no trouble communicating with them. Some of the other countries are a little more difficult, but as I said, most of them speak better English than we speak their language. So it's something you have to work through. The cultural, being a historian by education, I'm just interested in people. And I ask questions on their culture, and I've had some deep conversations as to what are the traditions and what are the mores on different cultural aspects. So that's how I've handled it, and I think it's worked for me. Kathy asked the questions on how do we give examples, or can I give examples of establishing bonds with remote team members? How do we do activities, and some examples of recognition? So how do you establish bonds amongst your team, you know, peer-to-peer? Team events. You know, it would be absolutely great to have those team events done in a co-located setting where you bring everybody in, maybe for a couple of days or a week. I know that gets expensive, and travel is an aspect of some organizations that they want to control. So those co-located team events will really establish the bonds between your peers. But you can also do remote team events, and these can be done, you know, through WebEx or Skype sessions, meetings where you can turn video on, and you can perform those team events that way. Recognition is definitely done at the team level, where people are working on a project together, and you can do that team recognition or that recognition at higher level meetings. So for example, within GE, we have all hands meetings, which are the entire organization. So it's the entire IT organization coming together with the CIO, and it's in that setting where we can recognize the performance, and the individuals. Next question. Leisha asks, how do you vary time zones for Scrum meetings? That's a great question. Somebody's going to be, if you do them daily and you have members in the Asia Pacific Rim that are joining meetings, you're either scheduling your meetings later in the evening, which is early in their AM, or you're scheduling your meetings early in the AM and it's late in the evening for them. What we do is we vary our meeting times so that we do not put a burden on one country or one location all the time. But it's an issue, and it's just an issue from a global perspective that you have to address. So we alternate our meeting times to take that into account. I think Kathy asked the next question, how about working with a vendor partner not located locally? How often should you meet, and who manages the project, like a web development project? Well, on the slide that I showed you of my team's made up of contractors and GE full-time equivalents. And the contractors are located in India. I have a team of 6 in Hyderabad. I meet with them every day, sometimes multiple times per day. That's a fine line where you have to maybe make sure that you're not treating a contractor like an employee. So your expectations have to be that of a contractor. You've given them specific tasks to perform, and it's probably definitely laid out in your statement of work and your contract with them, is that you're asking them to perform these 10 different duties or 12 different duties. And that's what I meet with them on, and that's what I go over with them. And it can be done in an operational type of setting, or that can be done in very much in a web development project. If your web project is laid out where you have different activities that need to be done, say each week, you meet with them and you manage the project with them, gauging their performance and their accomplishments, and then asking them the same thing that I would ask anybody in a Scrum meeting. What you get done yesterday, what are you working on today, and what are your obstacles and challenges that I can help you with to get those done? Angela asks, what are our favorite tools, or what are my favorite tools for project management and communication? GE seems to change those project management tools and comm tools somewhat like every year. So I've had experience with quite a few. I really like Rally for project management. And that's the tool we've been using for the past couple of years. And we've been using it in multiple settings. We've been using it in operational settings, and we've been using it in a DevOps setting as well. Communication tools, we have just moved over to Skype, and we've eliminated our conference calling cards and WebEx. So I think Skype is a very good tool. The audio is excellent, although we do have issues with the number of people joining those Skype sessions at times. So I would say those tools are the ones that are my favorites. Hayden asks, how would you suggest searching and applying to high-quality remote-based jobs? That's a good question. I'm not searching for a job myself, so I'm not sure, Hayden, what tools. I know that Glassdoor and Ladder are 2 tools that I've seen, and I see those frequently. I think I'm on their notification list, so I get emails for those. And I think you can probably search within those tools for remote positions or remote jobs. Alicia asks a question. I think she agreed with my explanation on English speaking around the world. Biggest challenge I hear is others with English as a second language need to process and translate so often feel the fast-moving U.S. partners do not give them sufficient time to respond, which inhibits their contribution. That's definitely, I think I go back to my example of imposing our methodology and our way that we work. I think you have to give them a chance to speak up. I think you have to continually ask them if they understand, or if they have any issues in understanding what has been said. I think that is just common courtesy, knowing that we have potentially a language barrier. So I think it's a process that the individual needs to put on their desktop so that they perform and do that. Okay, Kathy asks, we have a link to tools on the Working Remote Facebook page this week. If you are on Facebook, go to your Marketing Learning Center. Oh, it's not a question. Okay, sorry.
Thanks, Mark. This has been great. We really appreciate the presentation as well as your Q&A. If anyone else has any other questions, I'm sure Mark wouldn't mind you reaching out to him directly. Your email, is your email on that? Was your email? Why don't you give it to it?
Sure. My email is mark.squeglia@ge.com.
Okay. And I can send that information out as well. Remember that we're going to have this recorded, so if you want to watch it on demand, you're welcome to. And we have another webinar coming up on March 1st. It's called Email Marketing, Your Best Digital Asset and How to Build a List. You can't do email marketing until you have your own list, and your own house list is going to perform best. So thanks everyone again. We appreciate your participation, your patience, and your understanding. And we hope to see you again online in our next webinar. Thank you.